Here we are in the Waterloo County Jail Garden at 73 Queen Street North in Kitchener. It consists of many gardens, and right now we're in the Wall Garden, which it was the first initiative, but then we added the Arbor Walkway, the courtyard, the upper terrace, the Governor's Garden, which is around the Governor's house, the Boulevard Garden. There's a garden behind the jail, the former jail, along the wall, which are the climbing roses, 14 feet, and they're historic roses. And then in 2018, we opened another garden, which was the former parking lot beside the Governor's house. And that's a Four Seasons garden. And it's just a great place to reflect and think about all the history and even just to stop a moment and reflect. This is the Waterloo County Jail, which is now for court space for provincial offenses. It is the oldest remaining public municipal building in the region, formerly the county. I would say that the Governor's house is not as old, but has similar value. Both of the buildings were designated under the Ontario Heritage Act 1981, and both of them sit on the Canadian Register of Historic Places. You probably wonder what was the significance of the jail, and we have to go back to prior to 1853, 1852, when it was built. Started to be built in 1852, and then in 1853, January 24th, it opened. In those days, if you wanted to become a county, and we wanted to become a Waterloo County, you had to have symbols to demonstrate you knew how to administer justice. And the two symbols were the courthouse and the jail. Maybe 25 years later, 1878, we now have the Chief Administrative Officer and family who are going to be lodged on the site, and that is in the Governor's house. So the Waterloo County Jail remained as a jail up until 1978. And then it became very crowded and not according to the standards we would have for prisoners of 1978. So the province, the Attorney General's Department, closed it and gave it to the region. The Governor's house was simply used by the Chief Executive Officer, known as the Governor, and that remained in use. And in its final days, it was used by the police force. And then the site closed in 1978 and became the region's. Now, the courthouse originally that was built with the jail, it was demolished in 1964. So we're sitting with two original buildings, the Waterloo County Jail and the Governor's house. Now, there's another big story of how we saved it, the two buildings, the two historic buildings, and we really had to find a use. The two sites sat empty and they became very dank, and if you went inside on a warm day like today, it was freezing cold, especially in the jail. And so it was a hard sell, but finally, lucky that we had the Millennium come along. And the Friends of the Governor's House and Jail all along were pushing for reuse of the two sites. We were fortunate to have Millennium funding. Also, in 1996, the province of Ontario downloaded the provincial offenses, so the region then would administer the small court claims, like, your speeding tickets or turning left when you should turn right, that kind of thing. So there became a use for the jail. Prosecution staff moved into the Governor's house and used it for office. And then They moved out about maybe 10 years ago, and crime prevention moved in, and now crime prevention is no longer there, and provincial offenses prosecution staff is moving back in. For me, it's a landmark, and it's a landmark which has stories of interesting people. And over the years, when we were trying to establish interest in resurrecting the place rather than letting it go to waste, when I would do tours, inevitably somebody would come up to me and say, well, I used to live in there. That was one. Another person said, you know, my father was a turnkey. That was sort of the person who held the keys to the jail cells, you know, turnkey. This site was always in jeopardy of being demolished. And so in 1988, a group of us from the Architectural Conservancy local branch, Historical Society neighbors, we formed the Friends of the Governor's House and Jail. Whenever we could, we used it as an educational opportunity to do tours, to open it up so that people could see the possibilities. This continued on up until about 1996, when the funding seemed to be there, an opportunity. And then it was the fundraising that we had to do and come up with different ways of fundraising and promotion and so on, and tours again. When we started out with coming together with making this garden, well, the first thing was we went to Regional Council, and that was December 1999. And there was some question about whether they would go ahead, whether the council would go ahead funding to make this reused into a provincial offences court. And we said, our group came forward, and we had people from the neighborhood, the tourism, Architectural Conservancy, Waterloo Historical Society, and others who had an interest come before council, and we advocated. We said, we will raise $185,000 for a Waterloo County garden, jail garden, if you will commit to fixing up the buildings and taking it on. And yes, it was approved that time. And then from then on, we did visioning exercises. So in February 2000, we had a group of over 50 people come together, and we did a visioning as to what would this garden be. And of course, we started with the wall garden. That was the thing. It's a at one of the former exercise yards. And then we added all the other gardens that come around. I just find it's a landmark, a gracious landmark. It talks about our beginnings. It offers the personality of the region from the start. And also too, you look at the stonework on the jail, and then you look at the interior and how well built that is. And then, so we have architecture, we have stories, we have the history, and then by enhancing it with this beautiful garden, it's just, it creates a wonderful place with, for many, many people to come and reflect and have pictures and so on.